Everyone, and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the one-stop shop where we have a community discussion about everything magic, spirituality, energy, and we're giving you tips, tricks, experiences from us as professionals and just as human beings navigating this humanness to the best of our ability. And we hope that this wisdom and these experiences support you through your healing process and we expand together. So, if this is your first time joining us, you're going to want to hit, if you're on YouTube, that like and subscribe button. If you're on Facebook, you're going to want to follow us, but also we want to hear from you. So click on the stream, click on the active live videos. We can see you there, acknowledge you, and really engage that community presence that we're trying to build with you. And we really want to do that today because today's topic is how to retrain your thinking. We're specifically addressing inner thoughts. And I think in everyday life, as well as in spirituality, this is something that plagues us all as human beings, just trying to figure out the clearest path forward. And we talk a lot on this show about balance. Our inner dialogue, our inner monologue, those thoughts are going to come for you at some point, and we'll be navigating that journey together today. But in order to do that, you have to know who we are. So let's get into some introductions. First, I am Dahlia Rose. I'm the founder of the Conduit School. I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, and a conduit for high vibrational energies. I do this by guiding my students and my clients through spiritual development, energy work, meditation, crystal usage, and a lot of things that actually boil down to spiritual counseling and meditation. And I do this because I believe that we need to shift the way that we talk and move through the healing process and create some more sustainable ways to heal long term. So, but I'm not here on the show by myself after all this talking I've done.
My name's Katrina Raspold. I am so excited because Dahlia and I have 75 shows in the bag. This is our 76th broadcast. And so if you go to specifically our YouTube channel, but also on our Facebook page as well, you will find a lot of different topics addressed in our archives, and each one is identified with what we talked about in that particular episode. So be sure and check out crossroadsofcognizance.com. You can get to our YouTube from there. You can get to our Facebook from there, and that will let you see those archived videos. And again, lots of good information in there, and we are very responsive. If you come to a video that we made a year ago and have a question about it, just put it in the comments. One of us will see it and respond. If it's directed to the other one, the one of us that does see it will nudge that one and say, hey, they're talking to you over there, so go say hi. So we love continuing the conversations, even the ones that we put away a long time ago, because that's what we're going to do. Special in mind when we hit 100. Bram, I've been thinking about that, and I'll bet you can help me brainstorm that. We've really enjoyed having special guests come on. We worked with Corby Mitleid for a while, and now we've had Eric come on. And so having some of the special people in our lives that we personally know be present is something that's really big for us. So maybe we could just have a party and get a bunch of the people together for a round
all in the background.
Yes, Crystal Radcliffe has been an elder in our community for as long as I have been in the community, and even before that, and recently defected, left us, and moved to Kansas. So that was a very, very good move on their part. Not that I don't love California, I do, but for Crystal specifically, that was a very advantageous move. And I've worked with her for a really long time. So it's really nice Crystal to see her pop up here. And Bram, of course, has been my circle person for Gosh, I've lost track of the number of years. So we have a lot of people that pop in and say hi and contribute to the conversation. So we definitely want to hear your voice, hear you say what you think about what we're talking about. And as Dahlia said, today's conversation is about the impact of words, and not just the words that we use in perhaps spell work or our healing processes, but how we talk to ourselves, because that is the most important voice we are ever going to listen to. And sometimes then when we're super enlightened, what we're saying to ourselves needs to be moderated a little bit, and to decide, is this authentic? Is this from spirit? Is this from my higher self? And it doesn't matter if you're pagan, if you're Wiccan, if you're New Age, if you're just think of yourself as on the path of enlightenment, or whatever labels you use for yourself. The way that we talk to ourselves is one of our most powerful tools. And that's what we're going to be going over today. And it's a favorite topic of mine because people often don't realize how often they are negatively programming energetically how their day is going to go, how certain projects will go, and what their outcomes will be based on the self-talk that they use. Now, I have heard very enlightened people that I would consider my mentors, that I would go to for advice, uh, drop something and say, "Oh, I'm so clumsy," or make a simple mistake and say, "How can I be so stupid?"
Mm-hmm.
When this is the last person you would consider to be stupid. And where clumsy just means that you moved at the wrong time and dropped something. And yet that puts an energy out into the world and speaks to the universe to say, this is the label that I use for myself. And it is not a positive one. It's a derogatory one. Things like when we are working on a project and we say things like, this is just so hard, I'm never going to get finished. I'm not ever going to be able to finish this. Rather than, this is really challenging, but I am going to get it done. It's just going to take time. So words are important, and we need to be very authentic with that. One of the things that has always amazed me in the magical realm specifically is as people practice more and more, as they become more and more adept at moving energy toward goals and outcomes, and manifesting what they want, the idea is that your words become your tool. They become what forms in your mind and out your mouth what comes next. And you can't have it both ways. You can't have it so that sometimes your words are important and sometimes they're not. So, especially the more practiced we become, the more experienced we become, the more we have to take responsibility for the words that we use to ourselves, especially. So that's my long-winded explanation of what we're going to be talking about today. And I have seen my partner over here writing furiously. So I know that they have something to share. And I'm excited to hear what that is, because this was one of the topics that I kind of chose. And Dahlia's like, so what do you want to talk about in regard to that? And I just started rambling. So let's hear what you're going to say, my dear.
No, this was a great roll-in. Definitely got my mind working on some of my personal accountability with words, right? It's so easy to reach for the negative. We are pre-programmed to do that so that we don't invite additional suffering or pain. And so, um, you know, I can definitely recall times in my life where I've just reached for the easy words. And one of the things that I love that you said, this whole process is about moderation of thoughts. We aren't eliminating anything, we aren't punishing ourselves for anything, we are moderating. And a good moderator is going to go, okay, well, why do you think that? Or, you know, well, what brought you to that place? And do you think that there's anything else you can think of? I mean, as I'm saying all of this, I'm also recalling the words I choose with my children. Like I have a 13-year-old and I have a 6-year-old, and the words that I chose with my 13-year-old were very easy, and then with my 6-year-old, he's gotten a much more evolved version as I go, well, what makes you think that? And but it it corresponds with the inner thoughts that I've had for myself over the years. So just watching, I'm doing the ADHD thing and watching it bounce ping pong back and forth in my head about inner thoughts, outer thoughts, inner thoughts, outer thoughts. And so moderation of thought definitely stuck out to me when you used that phrase. And also, you said the authenticity of your words. And I was brought into a space where, in the beginning parts of my journey, I would work with the words of other people when it came to prayers, invocations, even meditation. There was this draw that I did not have what it took, and that was an underlying looping story that I was telling myself. I didn't have what it took. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't adept enough. I wasn't educated enough in spirituality to move forward. And I feel like this is something that's pretty common in when people start out in anything, not just spirituality, only to arrive at this place now where I'm like, I'm ready to make up the words as I go along because I do trust that whatever comes forward is at least authentic, as opposed to right, perfect, um, any of those sort of fake terms that we use to justify inauthenticity at times. So,
Unfortunately, our higher education is largely at fault for creating a self dynamic where we don't trust ourselves and where our voice doesn't feel important.
right.
And the reason I would say that is with any type of higher education, where you're having to write any type of scholarly paper or thesis or anything like that, your opinion does not matter. It just doesn't. Your experience does not matter unless you can back that up with some sort of scientific protocol, such as a long-term study or applying the scientific method in a very direct way and discussing your results. And therefore, what I what I have felt and what I have surmised is legitimate because I did all of this work to back it up. Just saying, in my life, I have observed that most people are self-centric is not good enough. You have to have longitudinal studies about why someone is self-centric. All and also you have to rely on the wisdom of other people because other people are so much more intelligent than you. You're just a student. So you need to cite this book and that book, and it has to be from just the right source. And you have to be able to say what page of what book you got this information from, or it's just not legitimate at all. You can't say, I once read in a book this, this, and this, and it stuck with me. You don't even dare say that in a classroom because it doesn't exist. Another way we get kind of screwed up is by humility. We're taught that humility is a virtue.
Mm.
And none of us like people that are always bragging about what they do or, making a big deal over the tiniest little accomplishments. But at the same time, society pushes us not to be proud of what we do. And so saying that or acknowledging even to yourself that you're really good at something can be difficult. And that's the first step to trusting yourself is saying, you know what? I've been reading tarot cards for 45 years. I wrote a book on tarot cards. I feel pretty confident that I know a lot about tarot cards. Now, I won't even pretend I know everything about tarot cards, but I know a lot about it. I feel like I can speak intelligently about tarot cards. That feels weird to some people. They don't feel like they can own what they've accomplished and what put them in a position to speak with authority about certain things. And part of that is because the other side of it is we have so many people stepping up to the plate who just got here and suddenly are speaking with authority. So society wants us to find the blend of, okay, when are you at a point that you should just sit down and shut up and listen and put in some time learning? And when are you at a point that you can speak with authenticity and trust that? And that's also a thing we have to work within ourselves as well as within our communities. So those are the things that I see that really kind of trip us up on owning our own thoughts and being confident in what we say. I think that even when we're confident, we should always question ourselves. We should always be open to new information, because as soon as we lock that door and say, you know what, this is what I believe about the afterlife and nothing else is getting in, you stop learning. So we have to be able to question ourselves and
Right.
get a sense of what's my word, like malleability to our beliefs, so that we can shift them and change them and mold them, but while still being confident that, at this time in my life, this is what I feel pretty comfortable that I believe. So
It's
that's
okay to
that's
be
how I think we get
confident.
there. Yeah.
It's okay to be confident in knowing nothing. Like, it was one of my
Yes.
favorite things to, like, show up with whenever something strange happens. It's like, wow, I don't know anything. And then maintaining that unique curiosity about different occurrences that happen. But speaking of that authenticity piece, I think for what Crystal is saying here, for those with an abuse history, very often the internal monologue can be snippets of tapes from an abuser's spoken an abuser from blah, blah, from an abuser spoken during growth cycle. It can be even it can be as far as speech pattern, tone, and dialect.
Mhm.
100%. I would say that's like the inauthentic voice kind of coming through and having some level of dominance in your inner thoughts. But again, it plays to that evolutionary strategy
Mhm.
to protect and, you know, if we listen to this voice, we won't get hurt again, and so on and so forth. And so it's kind of like our brain is kind of messed up in that way. Like,
Oh, it
we
is.
I wish it didn't work that way,
You
but
know,
unfortunately.
One of the things that Dahlia is excellent at, that I've started incorporating into my practice as well, is tracing back to a core wound.
Oh.
And so a lot what happens in regard to what Crystal said is sometimes we formulate a truth about ourselves early on in our lives, especially if we have abusive or thoughtless even people raising us who aren't considerate about things they say, that we stick, that's just in there as a grain of truth, and it informs how we behave and how we think about ourselves even far into adulthood. If somebody happens to say to you when you're little, or let's say you overhear somebody, your mother, say to her sister, she's really not very pretty,
Hmm.
and that's just your mother, having an opinion and sharing it with somebody. You overhear it, and for the rest of your life you just believe, I'm just really not very pretty. And sometimes maybe she wasn't even talking about you, and yet you internalize that thought. Maybe you are told at some point that you're just not very athletic. And so you live your life with the idea that, oh, no, I'm just not very good at sports. I just don't, that's not my thing. I don't do that. And so we should always challenge, and this is where I get to the Dahlia piece. Where did this original thought come from? How far back can I trace my belief that I'm not good at this, or that I don't deserve this, or that this is not authentic to me? Where does that come from? Because somewhere in your psyche, that seed got planted. Where did it come from? And once you work to heal that, you can stop and think that maybe that information is fallible. Maybe that information is not worthy of creating truths in yourself.
The identifying, so it sounds like we've covered like a lot of ways to identify certain kinds of negative thoughts, and then the challenging piece when you for you, Katrina, um what do you go through physiologically when you challenge a thought? Like, is there anything that comes up for you physically when you go to challenge that thought?
Absolutely. I'm a Virgo, therefore I'm always right. And so when something comes up to challenge a core belief of mine, even though I give a lot of talk through my mentoring and my classes that, hey, you got to question yourself. You've got to have malleable beliefs. When something comes up that challenges something that I have for a long time believed, it's fight or flight.
Hmm.
Immediately I feel this anxiety response that I have to fight down, because I immediately fly into, well, shit, if that's not true, then nothing I believe is true, and everything's a lie, and it's just a big mystery, and I can't handle this, and I'm going to be in my room. So, whereas it's not that complicated. One belief is not the little corner of the pyramid holding up all the blocks. And if you pull it out, the whole thing's going to fall. It's one thing.
Jenga.
Jenga, yes. And so I constantly have to reseat myself and say, okay, pull back, chick. It's okay. You're going to be all right. This is one thing. I have had several really strong positions that I have had to reconsider in the last several years. And so I've gotten some practice with this. My husband, those of you who know my dear husband, has no problem challenging my beliefs. And so there's a lot of times that he'll say something and I have to really pull back and say, okay, where did I get that thought from that formed that belief? And how does this new information challenge that or change that? And is he maybe probably just wrong? So, there's always stuff that comes up, and I do have a literal physiological response of just my stomach gets really tight, my heart will start to beat faster. I mean, it's a true panic response, because there's been times in my life that my truths were all I could trust. It just seemed like my world was falling apart around me, and I would literally have a journal where I wrote down things I knew to be true. And it was the simplest things, like, I do not like chard, things like that were just so generic.
Those were like your anchors.
Yeah.
To reality.
This is what I can depend on. I know if I eat something with coconut, I will not like it. Things like that. I know that I love my children completely. But, it doesn't matter how far we get on the path of righteousness and, enlightenment and all of that. I think most of us, because we have come so far, because we've invested so much energy into growth and learning, get really clumsy and uncomfortable when something challenges that. And what's really cool, and it doesn't seem like it's cool, but it's really cool, is that often it's our students that are presenting that challenge.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that when they ask an interesting question and you're like, I've never had to answer that before. I get excited about it.
And we come up, watch for these when you're taking classes, because we come up with like sort of bridges of responses. That's a really fascinating question. Let me pray about it and I'll get back to you. Or we'll say things like, nobody has ever asked that before. I'm going to need to work on that. What's your email address? So there's all of these really pretty ways that we are admitting that we're standing there with our mouth open, but nothing's coming out and we've got no answer for you at all.
Yeah. And then, there's sometimes these amazing moments where, like if you're in flow with everybody, something drops in and you're like, well, where did that answer come from? But it makes all the sense in the world and is completely valid and resonant. So it's always a fun experience. I mean, I like that we're talking about the physiological response to having to work through these negative thoughts, simply because, again, it's not a simple process. If your brain feels like it's under threat because of something that it believes is about to change, your body's going to go through this process, the quickening of the heart, the tenseness, and that doesn't allow new information to flow. And there can be occasions where you're aware of that physiological response, and then there can be times when you're not and you just react. Like
Mhm.
just shut the whole conversation down because this is, we need to
This
throw
is
this away.
bullshit right here.
Right, right. How dare you,
Right, right.
and so we get a chance to look at, um, like if you feel like you are traveling down a new journey, you're learning things, going into it with saying, okay, there may come a point where I feel threatened, either mentally, emotionally, and my body will process it physically. And not only am I challenging my thoughts, but maybe some response to the tightness and the quickening of the heart would be movement, like
Mhm.
get off. They say get off the X. So, move away from whatever you think the danger is. Take a minute. Maybe I know in the past, if I've had a challenging thought, let's say, my thoughts challenged around something really important to me, like maybe relationships, um, I'll go for a run or a walk because I'm like, I need to literally walk through all these thoughts I'm having till I get to the end of them. I've like hurt my legs in the process, skinned
Oh,
my ankles, and I'm like, nope, I'm not done thinking about it just to get through to challenge my own way of
sure.
thinking. And so there's a
Well,
lot of dynamic ways you can tackle it, but don't forget about your body.
I had it's interesting we're talking about this right now because on Saturday, now to my credit, I started the day with the preliminary feelings that I was going to have a Meniere's attack.
Oh,
And when that happens, I get really, really sweaty and shaky. My brain kind of checks out. And so I'll sometimes be a little foggy before and after. And there's intense vertigo and nausea, and it's really, you feel like you're just going to fall on the floor. It's really terrible. And fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. My last one was in October. Here we are in April, the end of April, and I was just starting to think, yeah, I think one's going to kick in eventually. And usually, when I get that notion, I've got like 48 hours where it's going to happen. So I was planning to have that day a little Beltane celebration with some of my nearest and dearest, just some dear friends. We were going to move some energy for Beltane. And so we were getting ready to file into the circle. And one of the things we do is that the elements in the people representing the elements enter the circle in a very specific order. And so I was lining up the elements, and these folks just started taking on these particular elements. And so I was getting them in order in the progression for who was going to go into the circle area. And I said, okay, here we go. Earth, air, fire, water, right here. Come on. And one of the girls who's a longtime student looked at me, and you could tell she was uncomfortable saying so. She goes, well, actually, that's not right. And I just sort of looked at her like, what do you mean that isn't right? And she's like, well, no, actually, here we do earth, water, fire, and air. And I said, well, no, it's always been earth, air, fire, water. And she just looks at me and says, no, you specifically taught us earth, water, fire, and air. And I was on the verge of pulling rank. I was even on the verge of saying something like, you know what, we may have done that before, but this is what we're doing now. Get in line. And I pulled back and said, you know what, in a cusp circle, the energy moves counterclockwise and not clockwise. So it
oh.
is earth, water, fire, and air. And I commended her. That is really good. That was a good catch, and you are absolutely right. And so yeah, that was a moment that I just had where something was challenged, and it wasn't my position was completely invalid, and yet to me it felt real because how the way that we say elemental words is almost always earth, air, fire, water. I mean, that's just the verbiage that we use. And so to me in that moment, that's where the order should be. And I was just dead wrong.
So it sounds like in order to be a part of this sort of change process, you also have to be mindful. You have to move. Like I heard you say, I had to take a step back. And to me, that always represents the moment where your thoughts slow down and you start processing, okay, what was there before? Is there motive behind this like interaction that I'm having? Is
I love
this
that you said
my
slow down because that's what the voice sounds like. It's like, you might be wrong.
so you engage mindfully with the slow voice and the information that you're getting instead of that reactive response of, this is what's happening
Mhm,
kind of deal. But your body was a part of that process because it was already going through Meniere's. So it may have been
mhm.
on maybe, or let me ask you, would you say that you were kind of on autopilot trying to outrun the Meniere's?
I needed to get through that ritual, and in fact,
Yeah.
I didn't. I had to excuse myself about 10 minutes before it was done and let
Oh, wow.
Eric finish it up because the attack came on so suddenly that I couldn't continue to function. And
Yeah.
so I had to leave it with him. And so, yeah, I was really trying to outpace that and just get it done. And that's never the right way to go about any magical endeavor is I've got to get through this before I fall on the ground. That isn't the way it should be done.
I mean, that's kind of an automatic response. Maybe this is me giving you grace because I've not in terms of magic, but I know when migraines come on and I'm full halo, I need lights out, no sound. Even my children are so amazing when it comes to this. They're like, "Mom, all right," I say I'm about to have a migraine, and I can remember booking it home with them in the back seat, going, I need you. Nobody can throw tantrums today because I can't function. And just so I'm empathizing with your need to get through a moment
Mhm.
because there's so many possibilities for things to go sideways and nobody wants to be picked up off the floor. Like nobody wants that to happen.
It is not attractive. It's not your best look at all. And so certainly that's something of, where we've been talking about challenging your beliefs based on the input of someone else saying, I'm not completely sure that that's true, or actually I've had a different experience that has been blah, blah, blah. And we also, because of the internet, have become less gracious about how we correct someone or
Mhm.
and we need to honor the fact that you might be changing a paradigm for this person, or you might be creating a physiological response when they're having to rethink what they just said, or maybe how they've done things for 50 years. And so being gentle about that is always good. I've always preferred when I'm teaching, if somebody correct me after class
Mhm.
or say, hey, I was really confused when you said this, or this. And I've kind of had this experience, or I was researching and this came up. I don't mind being questioned like that, but I prefer they not do it and argue with me in class. That's always tough because it takes up class time. It undermines your credibility. So that's one time that, I think grace is really an important part of challenging what someone says. But one of the things that's really integral to what we're talking about is being able to self challenge.
Mhm.
And there are times, and you mentioned having a migraine. I'm going to talk, I talked about having Meniere's. This is going to seem very stereotypical and misogynist, but man, when I used to have periods and I was going into my cycle, I wasn't there. I was otherworlding. And so I had trouble with linear thought and I had trouble with rational thought. I was
Mm.
very much in an emotional thought state for a day or two of my cycle. And so I had to get to a place where I could say, I bel I've got this feeling or I've got this thought, but I know that I'm in this place. And so I need to say, is this authentic or is it not? Now, this is not the same thing as somebody arguing with you and saying, are you on your period? Because I got
Oh.
a feeling you might be on your cycle. No, it's not that. It's a matter of self-questioning and saying, there are specific times in my life where I know my feedback is not completely reliable. And for me, it's when I'm okay. So if I've been doing a lot of cleansings and I've picked something up from somebody, or I'm processing through something like a psychic attack or something like that, my responses and my beliefs get compromised by that.
Mm.
If I'm going through a period of depression, there's an old saying, depression lies. And if I'm depressed, the whole world looks shit brown to me. And a really hard time getting authentic, joyful, and realistic thoughts in there because I'm just locked into this. We're all going to die. This is just the
Yeah.
worst thing that could possibly happen. I don't know how I'm going to get through, all of these catastrophic thoughts. And so I had to get to a place where when I start to have catastrophic thoughts, when I start to have thoughts that are victim sounding thoughts, I know this is not my authentic response because that's not how I operate. And so if I start to have thoughts in my head that sound like they're from a victim perspective, or they start to sound really catastrophic, like we're just not going to recover from this, or this is just all going in the shitter, I have to pull back. That's my cue and my signal. This isn't you. Something else is causing these thoughts. And that's when I have to pull back and really question my own self information, because all day long we inform ourselves. All
Oh
day
yeah.
long we give ourselves information about what's in the refrigerator, what we're making for dinner, who we need to call on the telephone. We're programming ourselves all through the day with our own thoughts, and so we tend to trust them because they're there and they're overall manageable. Overall, our thoughts are reliable. If I look at a piece of paper and say, okay, here's a pencil, I can use a pencil and write down what I'm thinking, that's reasonable and reliable. But it's the ones that creep in and sneak up on us that we really have to pay attention to, that might be creating ways for us to doubt ourselves or doubt other people. If Eric says something to me that feels offensive or feels hurtful, and I have the response of, well, that's it. I guess we're doomed now. We've been married for 26 years, but clearly that comment's what's going to kill the relationship. I know that I need to really question, is it that catastrophic? Or
Is it?
yeah,
Is
is
this
it
the
thoughtless?
straw?
Did I take it wrong? And so we want to be able to trust ourselves as smart, intelligent, functioning, enlightened people. But we
It's
just
it
aren't always that reliable of a reporter.
and we're laughing, right, in hindsight, but it can be so all-consuming in that way. And I love what you said. Like if you start to dive down that rabbit hole, like if your thought process, I mean, I don't even think I have positive thoughts that are so all consuming, but the negative ones really get a pass. It's like, okay, well, this must be it. This must be the way that things are. And there's flexibility is needed on both ends. I like what Crystal said here a couple minutes back about starting the process with deep breaths and centering, assisting with their evaluation process. And um, I would like to talk about different ways to center, right? Like the breath is always a great go-to, and you can still find centering in activities like um I was about to say I'm like an old lady. I love to crochet, or doing something with a craft in mind, because it just pulls you out of process. So just, I mean, nowadays we do everything on iPads and tablets and things. You can go in your notes and just scribble something, draw something, do something that's non-linear, and allow yourself to kind of pour onto the page. That can be very centering, alongside breath work, or moving from positions of strength. I think this is where the power of yoga comes in, where you can go from, say, like a tucked in pose to a strong pose if yoga is your go-to. There's Centering can be a very valuable thing during these processes. And I think also um, pulling on accomplishments that you've been able to make in the realm of thought. So even if, like Katrina was saying, your most anchored thought is I like this or I don't enjoy that, being able to celebrate it, to be able to say, hey, I found some truth in all of this madness. Um, it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, right? Like the whole thing of that story is about her coming back to herself
Mhm.
as opposed to relying on what her senses were telling her, while she was stoned. So that's really like, it's almost like when we get into these emotional spaces, there is truth there and it's worth looking at and honoring. But once you start overindulging, that's the tipping point. It's like you almost become intoxicated, drunk, high, whatever, and you're then viewing everything from that field. And if you've ever had any of those experiences, you cannot rely on what you see and hear. So
True. You know, one of the ways that this really gets convoluted, and I know a lot of our people that are listening to this can relate to this because a lot of us have had this experience at some time, is when you have somebody in your life that you do trust who is gaslighting you.
oof.
And that makes it really hard to trust yourself because this person is fulfilling their own needs by convincing you that what you see and what you think and what you believe and what you perceive is not accurate. And that causes you to completely doubt so much about yourself. And
Yeah.
when we're working with practices such as channeling or divining, when we're doing tarot readings, we need to be able to trust what's coming through. Now, we can look at that as I trust my divine power or my divine being, my deity, to only give me worthwhile information. But part of it also is trusting yourself to interpret what you're getting, because so often higher self is going to speak to us in symbols or in convoluted language, and we have to be able to understand what's being said. So there is a lot of self-trust necessary in some of the higher magics and some of the healing practices that we use. And if you have somebody in your life, even a friend, even a distant friend that you don't see all that often, who is causing you somehow to question your own authority,
Mm,
this gets really complicated. And sometimes you do have to pull back and say, I'm letting that information in. I've put it through the filter. I've considered it and it just doesn't feel authentic to me. I know exactly what I saw. Or I remember very clearly what happened and that wasn't it.
mm,
Or or even coming to the perspective of, I know that this person has their own reality and their own agenda that they're working from, and that is different than mine. Not
right.
necessarily you're just wrong, but just, you know what, I walked away from that with a different reality of what happened, and we're just going to have to be okay with that.
Our the differences in our reality is proof when we look at recalling even like crimes and different scenarios that we've seen and heard on the news. Well, I heard this. Well, I heard that. It's like a massive game of telephone that goes sideways. And that gaslighting piece, I think one of the most challenging aspects of it is if there is a great amount of trust in the situation and all of a sudden the gaslighting comes forward as part of agenda. And it doesn't even
Mhm.
have to be negative agenda. It could be protective agenda. It could be um, a desire to not feel alone kind of agenda. I've seen that come up before. But either way, you're asked to be taken out of, or to you're being convinced that you're misremembering something
Mhm.
instead of it just being a conversation of we remember differently. And I like what you said about, just processing it and letting it move through you if it doesn't resonate. I also wanted to comment on the deity piece and the guides piece. So, if anybody's ever sat in one of my classes or gotten a reading with me or talked to me about these things, I am very big on being pushing back on the guidance that I get. I trust it, but there are some times where I will just be like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Not that I won't, honor it, go along with it, but I will, and I think it's okay. This is sort of why I'm bringing it up. I think it's okay for us to be like, hey, I'm going to need a little more evidence. This one seems a little big, you know, I'm going to need that butterfly to glide across my window, or I'm not, there's going to be some delays in me following what you're saying. Or if it's less threatening, you know, go turn left here so you don't end up in traffic. They will give you like trivial things, and then you maybe don't listen because your inner monologue is saying, no, this can't be true, I'm not as connected because I'm not worthy at this stage of my life. And so you don't listen, and then you go on to end up in a situation like traffic as my example. I think these are healthy exchanges when you're dealing with the inner monologue versus divine guidance. And I would say some small moment to celebrate in that space is the fact that you ran into the traffic. Like, you were told about the traffic, and there it is, even though
There
it
it
sucks.
is. And we
So
do that. And we do it both ways, where let's say that we have some dilemma in our lives.
Mhm.
And I'm talking high power, enlightened folk. And we've got a dilemma. And so we throw a tarot reading to see what should we do. And it's very clear. You should do this, 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 and this. And you're like, I knew it. That's what I needed to do. Thank you, cards. You reinforced it. You are a powerful tool in my life. Okay, so let's say we throw the same reading or a different reading and it says exactly what we don't want to do. We just start picking up those cards. Well, this is just a bunch of bullshit anyway. So the ability for deity to agree with us is strongly instrumental in our ability to accept deity's word. And that comes down to people too. You know, when we're being asked to supplant a different wisdom over our own, that is a challenge, whether it comes from deity or it comes from our best friend or somebody we're watching on TV. And one of the most exciting things in the world that can happen is when somebody says something that challenges your belief in such a profound way that you cannot help but say, you know what, they are absolutely right.
Yeah, love that.
That's exciting. It's explosive. It makes you think, wow, anything could be possible, because I really thought this was so. And wow, I guess it just isn't. And so it can be exciting. And if we can look at it as another phase of development or another place of interest rather than a personal failing on our part because we believed differently, it can really make a huge difference in how we respond to that upgrading of our information. But overall, we just have to be able to trust ourselves while still being open to the idea that other realities might be correct.
It sounds like we're talking about the type of people that we have around as well, right? And so when I think about somebody being in my life to help my, I mean, it's basically like help my consciousness evolve, help change my way of thinking and viewing the world. Um, it seems disruptive on the outside, but really they're a huge positive influence for, you know, what I have going on. I want to be more, I want to do more, I want to get certain places in life. And so it feels important to say to surround yourself with positive people, but this is not an indicator of them agreeing with you all the time. It's in fact probably a negative scenario if it's constant agreement. Nobody's really thinking or questioning about what's being exchanged. It's more positive and expansive to have that sort of dissension in your conversations. And I mean, I was in debate class in high school, so you know, I'm like, all right, what are we going to talk about? This has to be invigorating conversation. So I love that.
So I we've talked about the grounding techniques and getting centered, being present in your own body when this is happening. That can be really tough because oftentimes when we are kind of skating on what we know to be true, it's because we're not engaging fully.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we are just relying on what we are, the facts that we know to be true, so to speak, and just trusting that inner voice completely, and somebody else comes in to debate that, all of a sudden we get pulled really strongly into our bodies. because we're having to use our brain. We're having to really think and evaluate what's being said versus what we know to be true. I would love to see a light up of what the brain looks like when a person is being convinced something that is different than what they believe. I'm sure it's just batshit in there. So, it's quite a process. It's quite an experience to have. When you have a week where this happens 5 or 6 times, you really start to feel kind of dumb. Even if you know that you're not dumb, you really start to think, gosh, what next? What's the next thing that's just going to blow my mind and make me realize I can't trust what I believe?
Curiosity definitely helps. Remaining curious about anything that you think you know. I mean, when it comes to partners, when it comes to truths and beliefs, and especially inner thoughts, being curious about where it came from, what happened, why is it here, being curious about guides that show up. I mean, I think my way out of everything is always curiosity. If I'm not, stuck, because it's not always the first thing we reach for, but curiosity for sure. So if you had to summarize like steps through retraining your thinking, what would you be giving us, Katrina?
Anytime we're going into major life change, we have to retrain how we think. And this can be something like, I'm moving to another town. You're going to have to retrain your way home. You're going to have to retrain the idea of where and how you're going to work, even if that's just in a different room at home, because you're now in a different home. There's all the people around you, who you perceive as your neighbors. That is a form of retraining how you think. Anytime that you are going through a new relationship, you're having to retrain how you think. Otherwise, you're going to forever categorize this new person into molds of people that you were with before. And so that's a way of having to retrain. You have a new baby. You have to retrain how you mother, because each child is going to be so different. And as you pointed out earlier, like between your boys, and I had this with my kids, we mother differently at different times in our lives. And you had a big space between your kids, and I did as well. I had boys that were 3, still are, 2 years apart, 3 boys that are 2 years apart. Then there was a 10-year gap, and I had 3 more kids. And who I was as a mother to the younger kids is night and day to who I was when I had children at 16, 18, and 20. So, we change how we mother. So my point is, the elasticity of our brain is always working on change. We can harness that and say that if we have thought processes that negatively impact how we engage the world, we should always question those. If you're thinking, every time I see a Filipino person, they lie to me, therefore Filipinos are all liars.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely challenge that thought.
right. Well, exactly. But that what that means is that you have had negative experiences with a particular group of people, and you are assigning a belief to the entire group of people based on the negative experiences that you had. You should question that, because it's negatively impacting how you are engaging the world. It may be negatively impacting how the world perceives you if you're saying that out loud. And so
Yeah.
it's a negative impact, and we need to challenge that. If we are finding that, okay, for instance, I'm going to go with the idea of non-binary people and all of the crap you hear from people complaining about having to change pronouns, or trans people and having to change pronouns. People don't want to challenge the way they do things, the way they believe things should be. And they don't want necessarily to be retrained into the idea of, this is what makes this person you care about comfortable.
Right.
So why not make the effort to do that? And so that negatively impacts the way that they are in the world, because they look insensitive, and they are being insensitive to the person who has kindly said, I would appreciate it if, or I actually prefer the pronouns they, them. Could you please? And so I'm just using those examples as ways that all around us, we have people that are in negative loops as to how they are engaging the world based on their beliefs, and they may or may not be willing to change. So that's the first thing, is identifying what is a negative impact, what thoughts, negative uh, responses and negative feelings, even if nothing is said in your world. And do you need to question that? Or are you around people who perhaps want to live in a little fantasy world where if you say, you know what, son, if you don't do your homework, you are not going to pass 6th grade. And they're like, oh no, I'll just catch it up at the end. Don't worry about it. You know, that's a time you need to step up. You're having a negative impact on this child, but overall, you know your impact is going to be positive because they need to do their homework. So you assess whether your point or your position is authentic, and is it sustainable? Has it been outmoded in some way? You know, really critically evaluate your position. Once you have done that, it is all about practice. It's about retraining, and it's about understanding you are going to be fallible in this. There will still be times that I look right at my sweet little Bram, and in my head, I'm dead naming because I knew a name before for many, many years. And I have to actively work. Sometimes, not all the time, it's getting a lot easier to get that right name to come out. And sometimes if I'm at the grocery store, I still look for hamburger helper hash, even though that hasn't been made for 30 years. Okay, I still look for it. I have to retrain myself to the idea it's not going to be there. So it's about practice. Doing something over and over and over is going to help you to become better at it. Now, an example is we had a conversation in one of our most recent broadcasts where we were talking about apologies and saying, I'm sorry. And I talked about how there are some people that apologize for everything, that everything that comes up, they think it's their fault because they've been trained to believe that they are doing something wrong all the time. So for me, the way that it manifested, if I was in a grocery store and somebody bumped into me, I would say, excuse me. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I was taking up space. I was in the space where you needed to be. I'm so sorry. Excuse me. And granted, all I'm saying is, oh, pardon me. I'm sorry. But it wasn't appropriate. And so if you just take things like that and retrain through practice, not doing the things that feel harmful or doing the things that need to happen, that really is what it comes down to. Identify, question what you've identified, and then retrain yourself into a positive place. And like you were talking about as well, modulate those physiological feelings that come up, and don't let it be catastrophic that you're just a horrible person or you're just stupid because you're forgetting this. That in itself is a form of negative speak, and you need to not do that. Did that make sense?
Well, good. Yeah, absolutely. And great steps for us to at least navigate through. One of the things that I loved about all the examples that you gave us was the opportunity to apply different concepts. And so as you guys are navigating these tips, realize that there are going to be some things that work better than others, and that it's not about getting to the end of this broadcast, writing down everything Katrina said and going step by step, like, okay, I need to. It's about holistically applying what works for you in the moment. So yeah, made absolute sense. Thank you for that.
Good.
And
Sure.
thank you to our audience for joining in and your comments. It's always great to see you guys. We love you. And we will catch you next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. See you next